The WLED devs are just cranking these features out. To be able to scroll text on a matrix without having to use additional software like xLights is pretty cool, but it would be great if I could jazz it up a little bit and run scrolling text over a moving matrix pattern. Only a few months after the devs released scrolling text in the 14B1 release, you can now make scrolling text an overlay over another pattern. It's not an official release yet, but why wait? I'll show you how to get that feature now.
Welcome back. I was so excited to share with you last time the new features that came out with WLED release 0.14.0B1. It's the latest official release for WLED that supports two-dimensional matrices. This is a new project that I have for a yard sign for my show. Essentially, I want to run my light show using a radio station so that the lights can go with the music. But a lot of the people that came to visit my home didn't know that there was a station there because the only time I could advertise the radio station is when the show wasn't running. So if I have the standalone matrix here, I can advertise the radio station that I'm using. One of the new features that came out with the matrix is this scrolling text. So if I selected that for my particular matrix, by default, it gives me the date and time. So if I go over to segments, or if I was to modify the segments, I could say, tune in to, let's just say 100, let's say 101.5 FM or something like that. And if I made that the name of my segment, it will scroll that text. So that's great. And it looks okay. I mean, I can do a couple things to that, the text. I can make the font size a little bit bigger, but I can't do anything really interesting with it. However, one of the features I saw back in February on the Reddit channel was that you could have multiple patterns. So how can I accomplish something like this? Well, let me change this back to pattern just for now. We'll just change this so I don't get the two things confused. Pattern. There we go. I'll just change it to pattern, and then I'm going to change it to, I like that DNA. Well, if I wanted to have the word scroll across this DNA pattern, I could create a separate segment. So you see that the first segment is the matrix of 41 by 8. If I added another matrix with the same dimensions, and I say, I don't know, tune into 98.1 FM, and if I was to make that part, and I was to set that segment to a scrolling text, it would do something flaky like this and flicker. But one of the new features is this little item down here. If I select this overlay, and it's a lot nicer. This is only available in the beta release, this B2 release. If I go over here, you can see it's the 0.14.0-B2 Hoshi release. Now this particular release, right now it's a beta release, and I'm going to show you how to download this and compile this. I also wanted to show you the different patterns. So here's one pattern, the tune in, or I could do a different, rotating release of saying welcome to Bytes of Pi, or I could rotate between these two different, I could create a playlist and then rotate between these two different settings. This is perfect for the scrolling sign that I want to run standalone without having to use an additional tool like xLights to send information to the matrix. Now let's take a look at how to pull this off.
Now that we've seen that a scrolling text overlay on top of a pattern adds a little flair to your scrolling text matrix, how do we get it? Well, right now it's not an official release with WLED. Most people can go to the releases. You can see here that we have in the releases. The latest one is 14B1, and this particular feature is a part of the beta release B2. Now I don't think it's going to be an official release, so we need to pull down a beta. Well, if I go to main, if I have an ESP32, I can go to main and I can pull down this version and compile it and run it. And how do I know which particular version that I'm on? Well, if you go to the package.json, there is a version name right here, and it tells you that that the main branch is on B2, so I know that this one has a particular feature. So if I was to download this and run this, and I'll actually show this here in a little bit, if I have an ESP32 board, it's no problem, that'll work. But if I was to actually take a look at this, I actually downloaded this main, and I was to take a look at some of the comments, what I'll notice is that right now the main is broken for ESP8266 builds. Essentially, they were updating the NeoPixel bus libraries, and for some reason, the NeoPixel bus libraries will no longer compile correctly for ESP8266. So if I was to pull down main here, and I was to run this on for an ESP8266 build, you'll notice, and you'll get a lot of these failures, and if you're looking back, you can see that they are on the 8266 libraries. For an ESP32, no problem, you can pull it down. So if you're an ESP32 guy, you can stop here. That's all you really need to know. But if you're in 8266, I need to be able to download something that's compatible. Well, if I was to take a look back at the changelog, I can see that there's a couple of builds here that were added that kind of broke the 8266. But the overlay, adding the overlay option to some effects, and that was the scrolling text, was added here at this earlier build. I found the actual commit point for this build that doesn't break the 8266. So I'll put this in the link below, but if you go to this particular commit point, you'll still see in the changelog that it is the 1402 B2 release, but it's just before the break. So let me switch back over, and here I have the particular commit point, and if I was to run it, and I'll pull this over here, if I was to do the same build and run, it'll work. Now you can have an actual working ESP8266 build that you can flash onto your lightweight 826 boards. One last thing I would like to point out is that if you're familiar with the 8266, the WLED guys are awesome and they keep building all these new features in it. But with more features comes more space, and these things are very small. And you notice that I'm using the ESP011 megabyte full build. If I was to look for that, pull some tricks, and one of the features you have to give up in order to save space is you have to disable OTA. You actually have to physically hook the board up to your computer in order to download the binary rather than over the air. Now that's a little inconvenient for sure, but if you're familiar with compiling it, you can use VS. You don't have to do anything fancy like get a flasher or ESPY tool or whatever. You can use Platform IO and VS Code to download that. That concludes this quick overview on scrolling text overlay. Thanks for watching.